You're watching Station Zero.
About 4 months ago, after having experienced my missing time fiasco, life was pretty much back to normal. I did, however, begin to have difficulty sleeping at night. I was either in 2nd or 3rd grade during this time. I would lay in bed sometimes for 5 to 6 hours wide awake. Eventually, it began wearing on me and my parents were worried, so they took me to see a doctor. The doctor said it was probably because I was watching too many scary movies or late night TV, which was obviously not the case, since my parents were pretty strict on what programs I was allowed to watch. But following doctor's orders, my parents became extremely strict on how much screen time I had during the day, and my mom began giving me herbal teas to help me sleep at night. Controlling and minimizing the amount of screen time I had was one of the most frustrating things I experienced in my adolescence, but I felt it was for the better because my parents knew best. I wasn't the ideal child, in the sense that, well, I've always been a little hellraiser. Both my parents can attest to that. As soon as my family would fall asleep, I would sneak out of my room and go out to the living room. I was too afraid of my dad to turn the TV on. I would sit and look out of the living room window for the most part. I saw nothing since it was kind of late or early, whatever way you want to look at it. One late evening, I did my usual sneak out of bed routine. As I made myself comfy to stare out of the window, I was expecting to see my usual possum run across the street, or the neighborhood stray cats, but standing right on the sidewalk, outside of our apartment, was my dad's best friend Tony. It was very odd. It seemed like he was waiting for me to come to the window. He stared directly at me as soon as I drew back the curtain. He smiled and waved at me. Tony was one of the first friends my parents made when they arrived in America, and so I had known him all my life as Uncle Tony. He would usually slip me $20 every time he came to visit, so I made sure I was the first of the kids to greet him. I gestured with my hand for him to come upstairs. No sooner had I turned to unlock the door when I heard a faint knock, so I was quick to open.
"Uncle Tony!"
I exclaimed.
"Come in, let me wake Dad up and tell him you're here."
Uncle Tony smiled and walked in. I ran to the kitchen and pulled out a chair and told him to have a seat and I'll go get Dad. As I hurried down the hallway to my parents' bedroom, I was startled to see my mom and dad already sitting up in their bed. Half asleep, they turned to me to say, "Did you open the front door?"
"Yes,"
I said loudly.
"Uncle Tony is here, he came to see Dad."
My dad jumped out of bed and ran to the living room to find the front door open and the chair I had pulled out from the kitchen sitting in the middle of our living room. "Who was here, and why are you opening the door in the middle of the night?" my dad said in a tone so deep that I knew I was in big trouble. But I figured Uncle Tony had gone downstairs to bring something in he forgot and would be right back. After taking a brief look outside and throughout the apartment, my dad deadbolted the front door and I was sent to bed with a, "You and I are going to have a serious talk in the morning." I was confused by everything that happened and thought that I was possibly dreaming or sleepwalking. But my dad is an old school traditional Mexican, so I knew I better hurry or I was going to get a beating. The following morning, I woke up around 10 a.m. and I laid in bed, hoping Dad would leave to go to work so I wouldn't have to face him for what happened earlier the previous night. Instead, I could hear my mom and Dad talking. My mom sounded like she was crying and my dad was on the phone. I walked out of my room and peeked my head around the corner of the hallway. As soon as my mom saw me, she told me to come and have a seat in the living room. My mom asked me if I had really seen Uncle Tony last night. My mom's eyes were red and puffy from crying, so that made me emotional. "Yes, Mom, I swear I did." She turns to look at my father, who is now hung up with whoever was on the phone, and says, "Jesus Maria y Jose." That's the Spanish equivalent of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. My dad sat next to me on the couch and placed his arm over my shoulder to pull me closer to him, and he said, "Uncle Tony couldn't have been here last night, mijo. I just got off the phone with his brother. Uncle Tony passed away last night in a car accident on his way home from Tijuana. There's no way he could have been here." I burst into tears for many reasons, Even as I write this post, my throat seems to tighten up, because I loved him. He was, after all, like family. My mom and my dad looked at me in a very serious but scared demeanor and said, "If you ever see Uncle Tony again, tell him we love him and we miss him, but that it's time for him to go." I was perplexed, but given the circumstances, I just nodded and said, "Okay." I never did see Uncle Tony after that night, but I think of him often. I did, however, realize if Uncle Tony had passed on, yet I was still able to see him and speak to him, then I might be able to see other people who had passed. I don't believe in heaven or hell, but I do believe there is an existence that happens after this one. And all these years after, I'm still discovering new things. Uncle Tony was the first entity, and many times they were innocuous. Sometimes it was horrifying. But that's a story for a different post. For the past 5 years, me and my boyfriend have been dealing with a weird issue. We're in a long-distance relationship, and we have this routine of watching movies and falling asleep on the phone. Everything is fine in the daytime and evening, but at night, we have continuous problems with noises on the phone. He's recorded our conversations several times while I'm sleeping or moving around. There's voices, whispering, and a man talking. I've been trying to rationalize what this is. I keep my TV on when I sleep, but the volume is always at 2, so you can barely hear it. I thought maybe it's just natural sounds from my background that we are interpreting as voices or words, but that just can't be the case. He clearly says, "I hate hearing that." Emphasis on hate. The past recordings my boyfriend has done, I've listened to, and it sounds like the same voice. I'm not sure what to do at this point. I don't know if it's someone playing on my phone, or if this is something paranormal, but it doesn't make any sense at all. What is the best option to do here? When I was a child, I had some very frightening experiences that still haunt me to this day. Bathroom. So, if I remember correctly, I was about 6 or 7 years old, but could have been younger or older. I had a lighter and wanted to see how much light it would make in a dark room. Normal child stuff for me. So what I did was make the entire bathroom dark, like pitch black dark, and then go into my room to pick up the lighter. On my way back, I was just in front of the bathroom door. I saw a tall, black figure peeking out from behind it. This was only for a few seconds, because I immediately turned around and ran as fast as I could to my parents, who were in the living room. Just writing this sends chills down my spine, and I was really scared by it. Bedroom. I remember I couldn't sleep one night, and was laying on my side, looking at the door that was in front of me. This event was for sure after the bathroom one. I turned around a few times in bed. One time, while turning around to look at the door again, I thought to myself, what if I'm going to see a black figure peeking at me like the bathroom one? Once I turned around fully, there it was, peeking from the door, looking at me. However, this time, it was really short. I turned around immediately and tried to scream, but couldn't. Since fight or flight hadn't kicked in, I was basically paralyzed. I decided to turn around and try and fight it, but it was gone. I asked my dad about this in the morning, and he reassured me that it was him checking on me. But I didn't buy it, because that shadow person was way shorter than my dad. Thinking about this event now, I think that it was part of my dream. It may have happened while I was about to fall asleep, and I have read online that you can have hallucinations in that phase. Door. This is the one I'm less sure about, as I currently am convinced that this is a false memory, because if it isn't, I'm very scared for my mental health. So basically, I was in my room drawing stuff, and I just finished watching some cartoons on TV that was something about hallucinations, and I looked at the door in my room, which was wide open. Then I looked back at the paper I was drawing on, and thought to myself, what if I had an hallucination about that door being closed? I then turned around to look at it, and sure enough, it was closed. I don't believe in ghosts, so I think there are only two possibilities: schizophrenia or false memory. Today I'm 15, suffering with social anxiety, paranoia, and ADHD. They are self-diagnosed, but I basically got all the symptoms of all of them, so I guess I have them. I can find a reason for the anxiety and paranoia, taking it back to an incident that happened at my elementary school, where a teacher showed us a very gory video of seals being killed. I threw up in front of everyone in class and was very embarrassed. I think that is the reason for my social anxiety. I can't remember if this event was before or after the others. If it was before, then it may have increased my fears and anxiety to the point of having hallucinations. Anyways, today I don't get hallucinations like these, except for seeing faces or things in the corner of my eye for split seconds. There are more stories involving extremely weird dreams, even getting to disturbing levels, but those were dreams, I hope. As a child, I had some hallucinations about shadow people and doors. Now today, I do not have a good mental health. Hello. I've never posted here before, but a few strange things have occurred to me and my boyfriend since we moved into our current flat last July, and I feel like this would be the best place for me to get it off my chest. It might be a little long, so I apologize in advance, but I was just looking for maybe answers or some sort of advice. Before I describe these events, I will say that I began experiencing sleep paralysis around 4 years ago, and have had a range of unpleasant experiences with it in the past. However, these experiences have never been physical, only visual, until moving into this new flat. I will also say that my boyfriend has never had any past experiences regarding anything that he would consider paranormal, though the events that have occurred in the flat have left us both a bit confused and spooked. Since my boyfriend and I moved into our flat, we have experienced minor things, such as noises sounding like something has fallen onto the floor and begun to roll across it, only to find nothing that could have made the noise. Other times, we have heard noises as if something large is being dragged across the floor in the hallway, but when we have opened the door to check what is making all the noise, there is nothing there, and the motion sensor light is off. One very common thing we've experienced is the chain on the bedroom blinds rock from side to side sometimes. This doesn't happen as a gentle swaying though. There have been a number of occasions where we have gone into the bedroom to investigate a loud clattering noise, only to find it swinging from left to right, rather than forwards or backwards. We have tried to explain this away as just a draft, but this would continue to happen even when there's no possible airflow from windows, vents, fans, or the radiator. Even if this were to be caused by any of these things, the chain would swing forwards and backwards, not left to right, and it definitely wouldn't make such a noise to begin with. It sounds as if it's being lifted up and released, causing it to hit the wall and begin to sway. Upon initially moving in, I was having terrible trouble sleeping or staying asleep, to the point where I had to seek medical advice. I was sleeping during the day as I work a part-time night shift while I was at university and finish work at 7:30 a.m. but I've just started going to bed earlier in the evening. When I was actually managing to sleep, I would have very graphic, intense nightmares. Some were so bad I would wake up and just burst into tears. On a few occasions, I would have sleep paralysis too, but there was one time this happened that ended up really shaking me up. Across from my bed is a wardrobe where both doors are fully mirrored. The right side wall, as you see it from the bed, also has a mirror above a small desk. During this particular sleep paralysis, I watched my boyfriend, who is currently not home but at work, walked past the wardrobe mirrors from left to right, but this appeared only as his reflection inside the mirror. He then wasn't visible for a moment, as he seemed to have walked out of the frame of the mirror, until I saw the reflection walk past the other mirror on the right. After this, there was nothing for a few seconds, but I was still in paralysis, until I felt something yank the bottom of my duvet covers away from me. Cliché, I know, but this has never happened to me before. It spooked me out of my sleep paralysis, and I shot up and grabbed my covers towards me. I still don't know how to explain this away, as my sleep paralysis experiences have never been physical like this, so I don't really know what to make of it. Another similar instance happened one night. My boyfriend was driving home from work and got stuck in a bad traffic jam on the motorway, delaying him a good few hours due to the distance from the site he had been working at. Because I was working early, I went to bed before he arrived home. At some point in the evening, I remember him getting home and me having a sleepy conversation with him right before he got into bed, and I fell back asleep. I'm not sure how long after this I was woken up again, but I was woken up by my boyfriend, who was standing at the side of my bed and had brought us some food. I was instantly confused, asking where he had got the food from and when he had left to get it, only to be met with the same confusion. Apparently, he had only just gotten home. I'm still so confused by this, as this is not something that has ever happened to me, and really creeped us both out, and I don't know what to make of it. The final straw for me was one evening I was talking to my boyfriend as I was just walking around tidying up, only to turn to him at one point and see what can only be described as a solid silhouette of a child crouched down directly behind him. At this point, it stood straight up and freaked me out as I ran into the bedroom and refused to leave for the rest of the night. The next day, I contacted my stepmom, who is very spiritual and has all sorts of encounters and experiences with the unseen world, including running her own business where she does Reiki and tarot, amongst other things. My dad and my stepmom came to visit the following weekend, where she cleansed the flat and recommended I buy black tourmaline for protection, which I have. Since then, this kind of activity has decreased, but not stopped entirely, resigning itself to just random, unexplainable noises. One thing that I noted when my stepmom came to cleanse the flat was that she had asked whose side of the bed it was that my boyfriend slept on, but didn't elaborate, and honestly, I didn't ask why at the time. But I'm going to, as the events keep playing on my mind, and I feel like I have no answers to anything. I really don't know what to make of any of this. The only connections I can make are all leading back to my boyfriend, with the silhouette crouched behind him, the physical sleep paralysis, him getting home twice in the same night, and my stepmom asking about his side of the bed. This is the second place we have lived together, and the occurrences only started upon moving here. I did scour the depths of the internet and found that supposedly we live right near a ley line, but I found no solid evidence to support this, though it is apparently discussed in a book about the city that was published in 1987, which talks about legends, folklore, and mysteries. This particular book, however, seems pretty hard to come across, with it either being unavailable or unaffordable. Does anyone have any suggestions or ideas that I could investigate into a little bit more? As for now, I'm clueless. Much appreciated. To begin, I need to tell you what exactly a white-eyed child is. There's not a lot of information about them, but from the research I've done, they're messengers of death. Another name for them is the angels of death. A lot of elderly people tend to see them right before they die. It is also said that if you see one, it means that either you or someone you know is about to pass on. At the time of the sighting, I had no knowledge about these children or their meanings. I didn't connect the dots until later on. The dots being seeing the child and then the death that followed. So, a little backstory. I got a job at this retirement home after I had to move out of my parents' house at the age of 18. Finding employment was proving difficult, so my best friend's mother, Lola, did me a solid and got me a job at the place she worked. The building was old. It was formerly a train station before it was converted into a retirement home. Since it was where many people lived for the remainder of their lives, there were a lot of deaths over the years, which meant that there were shadow figures. I remember asking my co-worker about them, and she said it wasn't uncommon to spot one in the corner of your eye. She told me not to worry about it. They were harmless. That was about the extent of the paranormal activity I had encountered. However, while working there, I had some severe anxiety, something I had never suffered from before. It probably didn't help that the environment was pretty toxic. The boss was sexist, and the kitchen was filled with middle-aged women with nothing better to do than gossip. Now, it wasn't my first time working in a less than ideal place, but at my old job, which just so happened to be Walmart, I never felt anxiety like this. It was always dread. I actually had my first anxiety attack working at that retirement home. It was scary and out of the blue, probably one of the worst experiences of my life, and I never had anxiety again after I left. Anyway, the day I saw the white-eyed child was just a regular work day. I worked as a dishwasher, but I also helped prep, mainly peeling potatoes and helping with other little things. So, I was on my way to the pantry to grab something when this little girl popped up in front of me. It startled me so badly that I stopped dead in my tracks, half expecting to mow a little girl down. But she was gone just as soon as she appeared. I remember glancing around the kitchen, seeing if my other co-workers spotted the little girl, but they were all carrying on with their tasks as if nothing had happened. I recall some of her details. She wore a white, olden-day dress, blonde pigtails, a white nightcap, and piercing white eyes. I might have only seen her for a millisecond, but I'll never forget how her eyes had no irises or pupils. To describe the dish pit, it was in the shape of a U. Beside my workstation was a door that led out to the dining room. The door had a small window. These large windows in the dining room overlooked the street in front of the building. It was around 2 p.m. when I spotted red and blue flashing lights in that little window. My co-worker came in shortly after, in tears. I asked her what was wrong, and she informed me a resident had taken their life. For some reason, I decided to walk out of the kitchen to see that the entire street was filled with fire trucks, ambulances, and police. Again, I won't go into detail, but I will say it was horrible. I knew who the resident was. They were kind, they were caring, and they were a wonderful human being. Their passing weighed heavily on all of us, making working at that place even harder. I'm unsure how to describe this next part, but the atmosphere felt heavy. Not sad, but evil. I know, I sound insane, but it was like on top of being sad for our friend, it was also like something had taken up residence in that building, like it was feeding off of our misery. There were a lot of deaths following this passing, a lot of health problems, and even the employees were suffering from the effects. I fell into a deep depression that I'm still suffering from, although that has been something I've been struggling with for a while. Anyway, that is the story of the white-eyed child. It's incredibly dark and does not have a happy ending, but I'll never forget it. I will say that if you or someone you know is suffering, please reach out. I know I sound like a broken record, but from one broken person to another, you're not alone. And more importantly, don't be ashamed of reaching out. You're not weaker for admitting you need help. You're a heck of a lot stronger for it. Alright, I could go on and on about mental health stuff, but thanks for listening. When I was a kid, my mum and I lived with my grandparents in their 3-story house. It had a basement, a ground floor, and a second floor. To give context, there was a living room directly in front of the stairs. Leading upstairs, you could see my mum's room on the left, and my grandparents' room on the right. My room was further down the 2nd-story hall, but I spent a lot of time alone, and with my uncle in the basement. For more context, the basement was a huge rectangle with one room directly to the left of the stairs, and one room in the far back left corner. Now, with all the context out of the way, here's the actual story. This all happened when I was around 8 or 9 years old. I can't remember exactly, but it was around when Halo 3 came out. The first time it happened is honestly the worst. I was homesick from school. In reality, I just wanted to play Halo, but everyone in the house worked, so I was alone, and my uncle was at school. The only Xbox in the house was in the basement, so naturally, when everyone left, I got up and went to go play Halo. I was down there for a few hours, playing games happily, when all of a sudden, the storage room I mentioned earlier creaked open, not completely, but just enough to see a slit of darkness, and plain as day, I hear my mum call me from what sounded like the furthest corner of the storage room, saying that she needed help putting something away. My mum wasn't home at the time, and I knew this. I didn't turn anything off. I bolted upstairs and laid on the couch until my uncle got home from school. He asked why I left the Xbox on, and he thought I was sick and laughed at me. I just laughed back and said, "My bad, won't happen again." The only other time this happened was actually during a family dinner. We had cousins and pretty much our entire family over for a holiday. My cousins and I were playing with Nerf guns in the living room until they got hungry and went to get more food. So I sat by myself in the living room, reloading my magazines with darts, when something caught my eye upstairs. It was my mum's door. It had opened, and because it was like 8 PM, it was dark upstairs, because no one was up there, so no lights were on. But my mum had walked out from the darkness and kind of waved me over to her, with a weird smile on her face. I yelled to her, "Why?" And she just kept waving me over, but I clearly saw my mum, so I didn't question her again, and started walking over. But as I got to the start of the stairs, I looked to my right and saw my mom talking with my aunt at the dinner table. So I walked over and asked if she'd been upstairs, and she said no. I went back to the living room and looked upstairs, and her door was closed again. Nothing like that has ever happened again, but it still gives me chills when I think about it. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And turn on the bell to be up to date on our latest uploads. And remember, don't change the channel.